Hey, poker people, it's Sky Matsuhashi, and this is the Smart Poker Study Podcast. In episode 143 last week, I discussed expected value, HUD equity, and utilizing the red-eye process for making positive EV decisions. Hey, poker people, thanks for joining, y'all. I appreciate the fact that you're spending some of your study time with me today. And thanks also, of course, for your support, all those emails, for liking and subscribing to the show. Basically, you are the rockingest poker peeps out there, and thank you very much. Alrighty, let's hit it. Today was going to kick off a new minimum effective dose series on post-flop plays. But I had a great idea for something that I think we can all use, and it centers around observation. Observation, as you know, is a key skill in poker. As live players, we're all about observation. We don't have a HUD and can't really track stats or numbers. But predominantly online players like myself, we can tend to over-rely on HUDs for information about our opponents. So I created a new HUD focused on making us more observant players. It's called the Observation HUD. Nice and simple. We can use this during focus sessions to help train us to be more observant. So that's the focus of today's episode. I also want to share an excerpt from episode number 46 of the One Thing podcast. It's a great little segment about avoiding overload and striving for mastery that we can apply to our poker learning. Please visit the show notes page for everything that I discussed today with some screenshots and links. You can go there at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod144. And as a bonus today, I will give you my observation HUD for Poker Tracker 4. Just visit the show notes and fill out the form at the top of the page for access to this Poker Tracker 4 exclusive. If you use Hold'em Manager, I'm sorry, but the screenshots in the show notes will help you make your own observation HUD. I don't use HM2 at all, so I can't make an observation HUD for you in HM2 formatting. But the show notes link to get your own copy of that PT4 observation HUD, once again, it's www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod144. Alrighty, let's do this. Gambate!
And now for our feature presentation.
So let's talk about the observation HUD that I created. This HUD has the bare minimum number of stats, as well as the all-important note editor. I use this HUD to improve my note-taking skills, my observation skills as well, and my showdown learning skills. It still has all the necessary pop-ups, so I can get more detailed statistics as I play. But keeping the minimum number of statistics there and playing only 2 tables helps me to stay focused on the action. It's really easy when you're multi-tabling to over-rely on the HUD and the numbers that it presents you. It takes focus to watch every hand and to try to learn from your opponent's actions, and it's totally worth it. I think that observation is more important than stats, but coupling observations with stats will make you a top-notch player. Your observations especially help when it comes to HUD stats that haven't accumulated just yet. It could take hundreds or thousands of hands to collect reliable river statistics, for example. If you're considering a river bluff, but you've only got 150 hands on the villain, you're probably better off relying on what you've learned from seeing their play through the streets, from seeing any showdown hands and how they've approached rivers in the past, rather than looking at those measly river stats. Alrighty, let's talk about the tiny list of 7 items in the HUD. The first item is the note editor. Just making observations isn't good enough for me. I'm just not good enough of a player. My mind isn't developed enough. I forget things unless I write them down, and the Poker Tracker 4 note editor is the best place to take notes. This is where I record my observations on opponent reads, tendencies, what they've shown down, plays that they've made, and my general thoughts on each player. The Poker Tracker 4 note editor also has useful automated notes that show things like which hands they've 3-bet with, what hands they've called open raises with, and how they've played post-flop. And I've talked about this before, and I recommend that you do not take notes within the poker client. If they remove the notes feature, you're screwed! Plus, having these notes available off the felt during study sessions is super helpful. I don't want you to experience what I did when Carbon Poker, they removed their notes feature and I lost hundreds of notes on players. Keeping notes within Poker Tracker 4 means you'll never lose them and they're always accessible when you're on or off the felt. And I'll get a little bit more into actual note taking in just a little bit. The next part, the second part of my HUD, is the player name. And it's very simple. I like having the player name in the HUD so I can verify that those stats belong to that player. The third thing I have, of course, is the number of hands. And we all know when it comes to the hands, the more the merrier for stats purposes. This tells you how reliable your stats are on the player in question. And the more reliable the stats are, the more you can use them to exploit that player. 100 hands is okay. 250 hands is good. 500 hands is very nice, and 1,000 or more hands is great, of course. And also, if you've got over 100 hands and you haven't made any notes on the player yet, are you really paying attention to their game, to the way they play? The answer is probably not, so get on it, start paying attention, start making some notes on all of your opponents. And the fourth and fifth items of my HUD are VPIP and PFR. So, together, VPIP and PFR can tell us a lot, and very quickly as well, because they accumulate with every hand played. I've talked so much about PFR and VPIP, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but I'll get into how I use them within this HUD. So with these two stats, we know what type of player we're up against. For example, a 45/8 player plays 45% of hands, but only raises 8% of the time. This is your typical loose passive fish, the kind of player you want to get involved with. On the other hand, a 2016 player is a tight aggressive player, and those are often kind of reggy or pro kind of stats. If you want more info on player types, go back and listen to podcast episode 12, of course. And the gap between VPIP and PFR, that can tell us a whole lot as well. That first player that I mentioned, the 45/8 fish, his gap of 37% means that he passively calls 37% of the time. That is a huge and weak range, of course. And that tight aggressive player, the 2016 player, he only has a gap of 4. So he calls a very tight and probably strong range consisting of pocket pairs, Broadway hands, and some suited aces. The sixth item in the HUD is 3-bet preflop percentage. We all know today's games are more aggressive, so having this stat gives us an indication of how strong their 3-bet range is. A player who 3-bets only 3% is doing so strictly for value, but at 7% or higher, they are throwing in a good amount of bluffs. This stat, coupled with VPIP and PFR, give us an even better indication of the player type we're up against. And the seventh and final part of the HUD, of the observation HUD, is fold to steal. And knowing how often our opponents fold to steal is key in tournaments and sit-and-goes, but it's also helpful in cash games. We lose a lot when we're playing out of the blinds because we're folding so often. So every steal that you successfully make helps to counter those losses in the blinds. Also, knowing how likely they are to defend their own blinds will give you an indication of their player type as well and how foldy in general they are. So those are the 7 items within the HUD. But beyond those, I've also included the Poker Tracker 4 Default Popups with the Observation HUD. Sure, this HUD is for keeping us focused on making observations. But if you do get involved in a hand with a player, you still want as much information as possible. So I've kept these pop-ups in. And I'm sure you've seen these all before, and many of you probably use them. The 4 pop-ups are the Tools pop-up, the Flop pop-up, the Turn, and the River pop-up. Regarding that Tools pop-up, this has a lot of pre-flop stats broken down by position. It also has the most common post-flop stats to help you plan the hand before you make your pre-flop decision. And the Flop, the Turn, and the River pop-up, they're all essentially the same. They contain the same stats, but they're just specific to that street. So you can see C-bet on the Flop, the Turn, or the River, Donk bet by the Flop, the Turn, or the River, and all other post-flop essential stats as well. It's even broken down by 3-bet and non-3-bet hands. So these pop-ups are pretty darn useful, and they include just about everything you could possibly want within your HUD and your pop-ups. So that's the HUD and the pop-ups. Let's dive into better note-taking now. I know that many of you take notes on your opponents, but I'm sure that, like me, you don't take enough notes, and they're probably not as actionable or as effective as they could be. On the other hand, if you never take notes and just expect to remember what you saw, you are sadly mistaken. The value of taking notes is that it reinforces what you learned about your opponent. Having a habit of taking notes makes your reads and your memories stronger. You must actively write down or type out your observations. This takes your past experiences, your past observations and reads, and it projects them all into the future, so you can better exploit your opponents with what you've learned about them in the past. And there are 4 things to take notes on. Number 1 is player tendencies. Some examples of these notes are like button squeezer, or small blind 3-bet re-steal with ace-7 offsuit, or likes to check-raise bluff flush draws, or bluffs pot-sized donk leads on the flop, or even passively plays flush draws on the flop and turn. The second thing you want to take note on are bet sizing tells. So some examples of these are makes min donk bluffs, or overbets the nuts, or 1/2 pot size c-bet equals weak, and 2/3 pot size c-bet equals strength. The third thing you want to take note on are adjustments to make. Now, these are things that you're telling yourself to do or not to do. So some examples are only value bet versus him, or never 3-bet bluff out of position, or call down versus half-pot bets with any top pair hand. And the fourth thing you want to take notes on are important observed actions. Now, these are the details of hands that help you to understand other comments you've made within the notes. It could be something like, called small blind with ace-8 offsuit, flop and turn min donk with ace high, the river comes in ace, he bet 1/2 pot. Now, these actions explain a note like makes min donk bluffs, but be careful not to let your notes be totally comprised of observed actions only. You should be mainly making player tendency notes, bet sizing notes, and adjustments to make notes. And here's a really helpful tip I got from Alex Fitzgerald. Use exclamation marks for multiple instances. For example, maybe a note that reads, makes min donk bluffs. It's followed by 3 exclamation points. This means you've seen him min donk bluff 4 times, once for the note itself, and 3 more times because of the 3 exclamation marks. Taking notes is only half the battle, but referring to them at crucial times is the other half. Train yourself to look at their HUD stats before decisions, and click on that notes icon to read what you noted in the past. Your notes are a tool for exploiting opponents, so get used to utilizing them. Alrighty, my book, How to Study Poker Volume 1, is still out there on Amazon.com. Paperback, ebook, audiobook, however you want it, you can have it. I highly recommend getting the paperback, so of course you can write in the margins, highlight, underline stuff, make notes, whatever you want to do with the book. I highly recommend paperback. And please leave an honest review and send it to me. I'd love to read it on the air and give you a little shout out by name for supporting the show. For example, I received a comment from Marius not too long ago, and he says, best book on poker I have read so far. So many good strategies. You get excited and want to implement everything right away, but I strongly recommend to take your time with this book. Take 3 or more months to work gradually on those one by one. This book is a tool. Use it, not just read and forget. Well, thank you so much, Marius. That is a killer review. You gave me 5 stars. I really am so happy about that. Thank you very, very much. And last week, I told you about the Punta Cana Poker Classic, how I was going to play it on Sunday. I did play it on Sunday, and I absolutely failed. They only paid out the top 6 spots. 6th got $3,500. The top 5 all won the $4,900 package to the Punta Cana hotel, airfare, food, all that jazz, you know. But I ended up going out in, I think it was like 500 runners, give or take, and I went out in 92nd. So not so bad. I could have done, I would have loved to have done a whole lot better, but it happens. But so I'm not going to be playing it in again this week, but I am playing plenty of cash this week, and you can catch me streaming a little bit on, when I play on ACR on Twitch at night as well, or in the afternoons as well. But also, speaking of ACR, Robert Rapp recently signed up for ACR through my affiliate account, and he's getting 27% rake back for that. So Robert, I got your name. I never got your screen name. So send me an email. I won't tell the world what your screen name is, but I'm hoping you're listening right now. Let me know your screen name so I can find you on the tables and I can exploit the heck out of you. Or vice versa. You can take me on, challenge me, and exploit the heck out of my nittiness. Alrighty. Thanks a lot, Robert, and for Marius for that review. Alrighty. Back to class, poker people. So, I love the book called The One Thing. I loved it so much, in fact, that I did a podcast on it way back in episode number 3. And speaking of podcasts, I currently listen to the One Thing podcast as well. It's a great show that's hosted by Jeff Woods. In this clip right here I'm about to play you, Jeff is being interviewed by Matt Johnson from the Life on Target podcast. And I think Jeff's answer to the question is totally applicable to poker players.
What is the one thing how does it help people?
Sure. Well, I think on the cover under it says the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. That's what it is. Now, what is that surprisingly simple truth? It's that most people wake up every day and feel like there's not enough time to do it all. They go from action to action, just trying to get as much done as they can. But at the end of the day, they wake up and feel like, did I even get anything done? The surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results is that you don't try to do it all. You don't ask, what do I need to do? You ask, what's the one thing I can do? Such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary. It's applying the 80-20 rule to the extreme. You're not looking for the 20%. You're looking for the 20% of the 20% of the 20% to the point you get down to that one single lead domino. That if you just flicked that one domino down first, would set this cascade into motion of all these other things that would fall over in your life.
Alrighty, so I want to apply what Jeff said to poker players. The simple truth for us is that we need to study and master one topic at a time before moving on to the next. But there is a humongo problem. There's so much out there to study. We're bombarded by podcasts, videos, articles, and books. There are live streams and poker on TV and YouTube highlight clips. There's Facebook groups and forums and Instagram posts. All of this is poker related, and we're inundated with it every single day. Every time we turn on the computer or look at our smartphone, it's enough to drive you crazy. What we need to do is apply the 80-20 principle to our studies and to the poker content we consume. In that clip I just played, you heard Jeff state a question that he uses to help focus someone on the most important thing that needs to be done right now. Here's the question again, except it's tailored to us poker learners. What's the one thing I should study, such that by learning it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Let me say it again. What's the one thing I should study, such that by learning it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Now, this question is what drove me to create the MED series, that minimum effective dose series. I created my list of 10 MEDs by asking myself this question over and over again. Beyond the basics of how to play the game, things like flush beats the straight, what the blinds are, and how you act in order around the table, the first thing you should study is opening theory and ranges. And it makes sense because understanding your hand choices pre-flop affects every other aspect of play, from defending blinds to 3-betting to c-betting to poker math and everything beyond, of course. So, after opening theory and ranges, if you ask yourself that question, what's the next thing I should study? Well, my opinion, number 2 is stealing blinds and antes. That's the second thing to study. Beyond that, the third is 3-bet theory. After you learn that, you learn blind play. And it makes sense that blind play is number 4, because you've already learned about opening theory. You've learned about stealing blinds. You've learned about 3-betting. And now you can apply all those 3 things to defending your blinds. Basically, you can't really learn to block a punch until you learn how to punch yourself, right? You learn punching, then you learn how to block those punches. Same things here. Blind play comes after all those other aspects. The next is player types and tendencies. Once you learn that, you can move on to c-bet theory. Number 7 is poker math, which we just completed within the series. Up next is post-flop plays, like check raises, donk bets, float bets. Everything that we learned up until this point will help inform our learning on post-flop plays. After that is the hand reading. That's very, very important. But you can't really learn hand reading until you learn all these other different plays and bet sizes and math and stuff, And the final thing of this list of 10 is having a poker mindset. So if you're looking for direction in your studies, I think you should review this list, find which MED your knowledge is lacking in, then get to studying it. Study that and only that until you feel supremely confident in your understanding and working knowledge before moving on to the next. Remember that question. What's the one thing I should study, such that by learning it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So that's my endorsement of the One Thing book, the podcast, and my own MED series. Good luck on your studies and send any questions my way. Challenge! Let me tell you something. If you listen to this podcast episode or any other poker content and don't put something from it to use in your next play or study session, you are completely wasting your time. So, having said that, here's my challenge to you for this episode. Download or create your own Observation HUD with a minimum number of stats. Go ahead and keep all your pop-ups for more detailed information as necessary. Use the new HUD within focus sessions of 1 or 2 tables. During those sessions, your goal is to learn as much about your opponents as you can, not from their stats, but from things like street-by-street actions, bet sizings, player type combined with their actions and bet sizings, and of course, showdowns. Take actionable notes on your opponents that you know will be of benefit in future confrontations. Now it's your turn to do something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
This episode isn't complete until you head to the show notes page at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod144. Go there for screenshots of the Observation HUD and additional links of everything I've discussed today, and to discover ways in which you can support the podcast. Also, of course, while you're there, get your own copy of the Observation HUD for Poker Tracker 4. Notably urgent things to study. So my friend Mark over there at exceptionalpoker.com, he released a killer article this week called The 10 Commandments of Winning Poker. And it's the 10 skills and abilities that separate the winners from the losers. And it's a great article with super insights. It tells you the 10 commandments and gives you some great information on each. This list is ripe for additional studies as well. For example, number 3 is thou shalt play against weaker opponents. He gives some detail on how it's in your best interest to hunt for the softest tables and to prey on the weak. So you can read this and get a ton out of it, but then you can use this as a starting point for more study and research. You can do things like hunt for the best sites by testing out all that are available to you, take note on the weak players so you can find them in the lobbies, experiment with playing at different times to find when the fish are active, and you can go through the players in your database to find the fish, find the stations, and basically the most exploitable opponents. So go to exceptionalpoker.com, and it's the first article right there at the top. If you visit the blog sometime later, just search for the 10 Commandments of Winning Poker, and of course, it'll just pop right up.
That's a lot of nuts!
Thank you so much for listening today. Alrighty, if you can type the words Smart Poker Study, you can find me on Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Or of course, email is always available, sky@smartpokerstudy.com. Alrighty, poker people, next week in episode 145, I'll begin minimum effective dose number 8, post-flop plays. It's going to be a check-raise-centric episode, so come back for that. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thank you very much for sharing the show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.